So hello, Tara and Eric. How are your days going?
Oh, pretty good.
Wait,
I
so
got
Eric,
some. Yeah.
Eric, you got a different background there.
From what?
Where are you at? You don't usually have a
Oh,
window there. Are you?
yeah.
Did you move your desk?
No, it's been the same since August 18th.
What the hell? I don't remember
Yeah.
there being a
Yep.
bright. You actually have a window
Window,
there that's bright? Not
doodads,
totally
and
bright.
knickknacks. I did get this though. I found this thing at a yard sale.
Inspiration.
I'm
That's
pretty psyched
excellent.
on that.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Eric got a new tattoo.
Yeah, I got two new tattoos, and I actually, when I was thinking about it, I actually accidentally got AC/DC and Metallica tattoos in the process. Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's
I can't show them to you because you would see wall of crotch first, but I got Beavis and Butthead tattoos in Seattle on my right above my knees, and they wear T-shirts. One says AC/DC, one says Metallica, so I now have horrible metal band tattoos. So I sort of realized that on the flight home, and I was like, oh crap.
Do you have any other music tattoos, or are those the only two?
No, I refuse to hitch my wagon to any band like that. That would never ends well.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. Tara, I could totally see you getting, now that we know you listen to death metal and all that kind of thing, or
Eh,
speed metal, I could totally see you getting speed metal tattoos.
Not speed metal or death metal, but yeah, heavy metal, new metal, that type of stuff.
There we go.
I don't have any tattoos yet, but yeah, that's the plan eventually.
Absolutely no tattoos here. There was a time in my life where I thought that was interesting, and yeah, no, nope. I'm average white guy. Although probably average white guy probably does have tattoos. I bet
Hmm.
overall, population-wise. Yeah.
Most likely, yeah.
That's interesting.
One of my last jobs, there was one of my coworkers called the average white guys the AWG. So she's like, "Yep, there's the AWG."
And I immediately think of that as the wire gauge. AWG is like the wire gauge size, like 14 gauge or 18 gauge. That's the speaker geek in me. Well, we got questions piling in here. We might as well ask. Let's see here. We have a licensing question. I need the Microsoft doc for licensing all cores on a VM host with a, this is just a rambling bunch of words. Need Microsoft documentation for licensing all the cores on a VM host with Enterprise, allowing all SQL VMs on the host to be licensed. I think what you're looking for is the licensing guide. If you search for Microsoft SQL Server licensing guide, it's one of the rare pieces of documentation that is wonderful. It has pictures. It's fantastic. Like, I love the licensing guide. It's really good. Have any of you guys had the chance to read through the licensing guide?
God no.
I only read through what I have needed to, and
Yeah.
it's been precious little, thankfully. There were
I'm
some
telling
questions
you.
about like VMs and stuff, and I was just like, oh, okay, well,
It's great. It's got great character development. The plot is wonderful. It's
The ending
really
kind of
good.
sucked, but you know,
Yeah.
good run.
When Bill
if the
Gates
guide doesn't suit you, there's like a 5-day licensing class that you can take from Microsoft. You can learn the
There
joys of
is.
licensing.
There's a company called Directions on Microsoft, and one of the guys who does it is Get Wired on Twitter, and they just have a boot camp on licensing. So if you think our training is bad, just wait. It could be
Best
so
five
much
days of
worse.
sleep I've ever had.
That's probably what you need to watch before. You gonna like take a nap or anything before the World Series game, or are you just like 100% wired?
I'm completely wired. I could barely hold it together. I don't know what to think. My head is saying they're going to break your heart. They're going to lose in spectacular fashion by being up 3 runs, a grand slam in the 9th inning with 2 outs and 2 strikes and Chapman on. That's what my head is telling me is going to happen, but my heart is saying they're going to do it tonight. So I am just like this split person. I am a shell of a man. I am a complete and total mess right now. I am wrecked. I am ruined.
So it's Wednesday. Yeah, it's normal.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. That's it.
Is that something in AWS or was that the Cubs? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh. Yeah, I
Was it
actually had to
Lambda
work in
something?
Azure today, and it just
Uh, Next question. Say, hi guys, we see high latency reads and writes currently. So our company purchased Fusion IO drives for a 2-node cluster. running System Manager in a data warehouse. We want to take advantage of the Fusion IOs. What should we do with them? Would you recommend buffer pool extensions? Right now we have 256 gigs of RAM with no memory issues. Or in-memory OLTP and attempt to move, well, in-memory, it doesn't matter what storage you use there, so we could kind of short-circuit that. What should I do with my fancy Fusion IO drives? Man, wow, that's kind of cool. So if you had a couple of Fusion IO drives, what would you do with them? In a cluster, keep in mind.
Sorry, I didn't catch. So are these local drives or are these
Yeah, they're local.
Oh yeah, stick 10 dB on those then. Maybe
And
stick
so
some
is
log files on them if you have, some logs that you want to make sure they go speedy with.
Well, but it's a cluster though. That's where it gets complicated. It's if you're
right. Oh yeah, cluster. Just 10 dB then. Skip the log files.
So what is if you were going to decide what you were going to, and really that's the only option that you have. So what are there any symptoms that you would look for before you would say, hey, let's go get Fusion IO drives and use them for temp DB?
Yeah, temp DB horribleness, the kind that does not get resolved by adding multiple files or turning on trace flags or doing anything fancy. Looking at the kind of slow reads and writes that can happen sometimes when you're piling things in, or just looking at my workload and saying, okay, I use the crap out of temp DB. I use a bunch of temp tables. I have triggers. I do all sorts of horrible things that don't fit in the memory that I have, so I'm just going to make temp DB as fast as possible.
When you guys are looking for, where should you invest, like hardware or changes in code, indexes, whatever, what kind of places do you go look? What metrics do you go look at? Tara, I'll point to you, Tara.
Okay. In my past few jobs, we've always had a performance test, load test environment. And we've got production, and we would be able to baseline the systems, and we'd be able to, do a load for what the load is going to look like 2 years from now, and then be able to determine when we're running out of hardware. So I mean, just the typical things for performance monitor counters, disk, CPU, memory, looking at where we're waiting, where SQL Server is waiting on things. This is assuming that we've already optimized as much as we could in the database. So just having that load test environment where we could do synthetic production loads and being able to do loads from like a year from now, 2 years from now, if you have that type of environment and tools.
And if you don't have that kind of environment, if you just got yourself a couple of fancy Fusion IO drives, it sounds like you just got the opportunity to go build one of those environments, because your load test environment doesn't necessarily have to exactly mirror production if you got a nice set of Fusion IO drives.
Yeah, not many people are throwing Fusion IO into dev test and QA.
Yeah. And it sounds like you probably have buckets of money, so hey, if you're able to just get Fusion IO drives for no apparent reason, that's freaking awesome. Let's see, next one. We are looking to upgrade 16 SQL Server 2012 instances. They all hold third-party databases, and we're trying to decide, going for either SQL Server 2014 or 2016. Should we just man, this is a bunch of words.
Yeah.
Is it better to install each of these instances all to 2016, like bring everything to 2016, and run all the databases in 2014 compat mode where necessary, or should we just only go with what the vendor supports? I think what the root of the question is, if a vendor says they only support SQL Server 2014, can I install their databases on 2016 but run them in 2014 compat mode?
If it were me, I would not be doing that. I mean, you're potentially breaking the license that you have with the vendor. But even still, if you have a test environment, some of these vendor applications won't even start up because they are checking at version to see what your version is, and you don't get to pass go. So I mean, if you wanted to go down the route of 2016 with 2014 compatibility level, you're going to need a test to see whether or not the application will even load, because they might be checking the server version. But if it were me, for vendor applications, I go with whatever they say is what they can support. I don't want a chance running into an issue in production. And you won't have a fallback plan. If you're going to go to 2016, you can't restore back to 2014. It's a very painful process.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Would you guys recommend running once a week stats updates, even though you rebuild indexes daily? And specifically, so this person says they use Ola Hollingren's rebuilding of indexes daily. That doesn't mean you're rebuilding all of the indexes, does it? What does that mean?
I think he's got the schedule flipped. I would update stats daily and do the rebuild, reorg weekly, maybe even less frequently, such as monthly, quarterly even, or how about never?
And why is that?
You're not doing it for performance reasons. You are getting update statistics, which is why people think that you get better performance when you rebuild indexes. So just do your update stats, because rebuilding indexes is a really tough way to get update statistics. Rebuilding indexes and reorganizing more about overall database health. It does help with storage, compacts it down. But if you're just talking about performance, update stats is where it's at.
I think as most workloads, at least OLTP ones, don't typically benefit from rebuilt indexes. If you're just doing a lot of singleton or short range seeks on things, you're not going to see a huge difference if you rebuild indexes. It's mostly for those behemoth sort of terabyte plus data warehouse style workloads where you're taking that whole table and you're joining it to that whole table and then you're squishing it and aggregating it. Precious few filters in the where clause on that.
Next up, someone says they're rooting for the Indians just because of the movie Major League. I saw Richie's making a great face.
I just hope it ends like the end of movie Major League,
Ooh.
where they win the championship but they lose the World Series. See, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, I think Richie's probably going to be insufferable either way. If they win or if they lose, we're going to be paying for it in the company chat room for the next week.
Oh yeah, they're just going to be tears shed one way or the other tonight.
Next question, can you guys direct me to a good blog on what perfmon counters I should be collecting? As it happens, I'm famous for that. If you go to brentozar.com/go/perfmon, so brentozar.com/go/perfmon. Got a video on there that you can go watch and my list of favorite perfmon counters and what they mean. Mandy asks, Tara, you mentioned having a performance test environment at your previous jobs. What technologies did you use in order to simulate production load on those test boxes?
I don't remember all the tools that were in play, but I know that LoadRunner was one of the tools that I used in my last 3 jobs. And my last job, though, a lot of stuff was just written directly into Visual Studio. But LoadRunner was the main tool.
And did you guys have a dedicated team of people to manage LoadRunner? Yeah.
Yeah, these were not small companies, so yeah, we had dedicated teams for load test environments. They knew how to use LoadRunner. They knew how to code. They knew how to use all these tools.
Yeah.
Yep, I've seen. Yeah. Richie, what about you? What stuff have you seen used in the past?
For perf, I haven't been on teams big enough to have perf testing, right? So it's always been, is it work functionally, and we'll get it out, and if there's a problem, well, we'll have to fix it, as it comes on. So perf testing is a whole different other ball of wax, and usually you have, like Tara said, dedicated team does all that for you. So it's just a different skill set that your normal devs usually don't have.
And LoadRunner is a good example. It's a expensive piece of software. It's different. I don't expect DBAs to know how to use it or developers to know how to use it. I don't know how to use it. When I go into companies, sometimes every now and then I see a team over there in the corner, and they're like, we're the load test team. Because if you think about it, if you have to reproduce production load, what you really have to do is redo that test every time there's a new deployment of the software. You add new features in. You learn that people are using it in different mixes. So you can't just build one test and then call it a day. It ends up being a full-time job. Next question. We may not have the budget to upgrade all our SQL servers to 2016 yet, or next year. Do you guys know if 2016's analysis services can work with R2's analysis services? Right now, we do cube development on one box and aggregation on another. God, I know they changed the models between tabular and whatever the other one's called. Not tabular.
Not tabular. Yeah,
we're not the right people to ask for this question.
No. Who I would check with is Chris Webb with 2 B's. Chris Webb does a lot of analysis services blogs. Andy Leonard does a lot of integration services blogs. If you search for Andy Leonard SSIS, I forget the name of his company that's out there, but he doesn't do, I don't think, analysis services, but he can point you to the right person. Who else does analysis services stuff?
I would just spin up a couple of VMs and try out my use case on it.
That's because you live like a crazy man.
I know.
Wow.
Because if someone tells me, yeah, it would work just fine, then I'm like, okay, cool. But then I'm like, as soon as I start doing something, I'm like, wait, I'm doing weird things that person couldn't possibly know about or couldn't
That's true.
possibly be accounted for. So that's why I always like to, if I get like that initial okay, like, is Service Pack 3 cool? Yeah, okay. But then, when I go to install it, like, oh, wait, I'm doing something weird. So, I just like to make double sure that it fits my use case as well as a sort of general, okay, that works, but, who knows what things people have tested and what things they haven't tested.
Development Edition is totally free, too. You can go download it, or if you go to SQLServerUpdates.com, I've got a link on where you can go grab it from. Next up, we have high memory usage. I don't think he's referring to marijuana, but since increasing from 256 gigs to 512 gigs, our monitoring metrics show a big increase, and there's no complaints from end users. We upgraded to SQL 2012, and memory is our largest weight. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question there before we tackle that. When you say memory is your largest weight, what do you mean by that? Like, what tool are you using to gather that data, and what's the specific word on the screen that says we're waiting on memory? We want to see a little bit more about that. I have a hunch, but I don't want to push anybody under the bus until I see it.
Also, if you increase the amount of memory you have, you're probably going to increase the amount of memory that you're using.
And if users aren't
SQL's
complaining,
going to use every bit that it can.
What does SQL Server use memory for?
Everything. Everything. What doesn't it use memory for? That's a better question.
I just wonder if they're looking at like Task Manager and just seeing the available megabytes. SQL Server went ahead and used all that memory, and that's normal. SQL Server is going to use that 512 gigabytes or whatever you allocated to SQL Server. And and also make sure you also updated your max server memory setting if you had changed it when you're on the lower amount of memory.
Let's see, and yeah, I want to go down that rat hole, and I'm not going to go. There's an interesting one that's not even really a question, but it's a good topic. Automate restore to dev, rather than playing Alex Trebek and saying, please format your answer in the form of a question. That actually is a good. So if you guys were going to regularly automate restores from production to dev, what tools would you use and why?
You know what? I've got a really old blog on this topic that we had developed. I'm not sure that I would use that method now, but there's a script out there for me that you can. It grabs the latest backup from a folder, pulls it over. I think it even zips it with some kind of old utility back then. Restores it on the server, and it's got everything in there. These days, though, if you're using a SAN, we did SAN snapshots and then just pop it over, and we're good to go. But that was mostly for CheckDB process, not necessarily for dev.
Oh, we have a follow-up.
Okay.
We have a follow-up. He says, for prod load testing, he's saying you should automate restores to dev. Well, yeah, but that's only the data. You still got to have your workload on it. Unless your workload is restores, in which case.
Cool. Yeah, we did that manually. We did it about twice a month, refreshing our load test environment, but it would be dependent upon the load test team when they needed those refreshes. But it was I should say it's done manually, but it was all automated. They just had to click a job to do it. It's basically the same thing. Grab the latest backup, pull it over, do the restore. We were using availability groups in that environment, so set all that up, and magic, it was all there.
Yeah, because once you know where your full backups are going, it's pretty easy to pull the most recent file out of that folder.
Yeah, and it still may not be a good idea to use production data because your production data still might not reach all of your use cases that you need to test, especially on the outer rim, stuff that shouldn't happen but probably will at some point. The data is probably not going to be in production. So as well as there may be some sensitive data in there as well that you may have to clean, obfuscate, and or remove. So data, although it's good and you test your queries around it and stuff like that, it probably doesn't have everything you need if you're running adequate testing against it.
One of my struggles with the load test environment was, they had all these wonderful scripts with load runner, and they said this was the production like load. But when I would dig into the details and I'd run a trace in like the load test environment, I'd run a trace in in production or extended events, whatever tool you're using, and I would see that the store procedure execution count would be so much higher in the load test environment than it was in production. I was like, this is not realistic. This is not what we're seeing in production, and I don't have an answer for it. It was a really hard thing for them to figure out. How do you make sure that your load test environment has a real production like load, and not just what we think production looks like?
Yeah,
I totally saw it I was involved in one project where we did load testing, and the load test had thousands of people concurrently editing their profile, but it was the same user over and over again. So we ran into all kinds of like, yes, you're going to have blocking problems when the same user is updating their profile across 5,000 sessions. I got next question. We got an SSIS package that takes way longer to run than under a SQL agent job, as opposed to running it in BIDS and Visual Studio. What would I look at to determine why a query runs fast in one place and slow in another?
Well, we're at the 30-minute mark, so we should probably bring it up.
Look at that. Look at that. Amazing.
I'm surprised it's that way. It's usually the opposite. So when you run it through BIDS, your Visual Studio, it's got the GUI. It's generating all kinds of information. You're going across. I haven't seen it in that order. Usually, it's when it runs as an agent job, it runs faster. I wonder if maybe the SQL agent job is pointing to a resource that's maybe further away than when you run it in BIDS. Maybe it's on the same subnet as your. Takes way longer to run under a SQL agent job. Yeah, so maybe there's a remote share that's on your subnet, but it's further away for the agent job. I don't know. I think that there's probably some kind of remote resource that we're talking about here.
So we got a follow-up on the memory question, and it is exactly as I suspected. There is a popular monitoring tool called SolarWinds, and this person says we're using SolarWinds, and memory CPU is listed as the metric. So by all means, what you want to do next is go talk to SolarWinds, talk to their support team, and ask what you should do about that weight. And maybe more specifically, ask exactly what that weight type means. It's a very common question that we get amongst SolarWinds users. It does not mean that you're waiting on what you think it does.
Also, ask why it's red.
Great.
Brent wouldn't know that at all, by the way. He just.
I only know because people tell me they're like, this big, huge bar here, it's red, that must mean something. And I'm like, well, I'm red-green colorblind, so it doesn't mean anything to me. Next question, someone says, how was PASS? I really enjoyed your topic. Well, thanks. We should actually each talk about the thing we liked most out of PASS Summit, or what it meant to us. So Richie, you're next to me or Sammy Sosa is next to me on the webcam, so I'll go with you, Sammy.
Sammy Sosa.
Sammy Sosa.
Wow, PASS was different for me. It was the first time I came with a company and not just by myself. So it was totally a blast because we don't actually get to hang out very much. People go in the office and see each other and stuff like that. We see each other like maybe 3 times a year, and that's it. So getting a lot of face time with everyone, I think, was really the highlight of my PASS. Just kiss up.
Seeing your dear coworkers.
Yeah. Remember to cover from me, Erik. I think the other part for me was I thought the keynote was good and the sessions are good, but they're always good, and they're always good at SQL Saturdays and stuff because these is our community. But it's outside of the community that I actually had a blast with at some of the parties. Playing board games at 1:30 at night was a highlight for me. So that was a blast with some of the other fellow PASS folk, and that was great. So I had a blast. I had a good time. Not a lot of Cub wins, but that's okay. We'll fix that tonight.
So what I got out of that is Richie didn't really like the conference. He just likes to hang out afterwards and play board games. We'll remember that for Richie's career planning for next year.
That's right.
Tara, you're up next.
I really like hanging out with my coworkers. We don't get to see each other very often, so that was nice.
I'm looking at Cub sessions.
The networking, meeting people that we talked to online for a long time and seeing them in person. That's great. The sessions that I did see were good. One of the challenges I had is that when there was a session I wanted to see, there were like 4 sessions that time I wanted to see, and then there were entire times where there was nothing I wanted to see, and I just wish that that it was more spread out. And I felt like that people had the same problems because I kept talking to people like, yeah, what are you going to see at 3 o'clock, whatever time it was. I'm just using it as an example. Like, there's nothing interesting me. It was the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm. I almost wish they had tracks of like one 400 level track, one BI track, just specific tracks where that if you're interested in one topic, there's always going to be a different session available for it. Erik, how about you? This is your first time at PASS.
Yeah, it was my first time, so I really enjoyed getting to meet people who I had only sort of interacted with on the old internet for a while. So that was really cool. Kalen Delaney, Grant Richie, Steve Jones, Joe Sack was a big one. I loved talking about. I loved actually my favorite part was probably hanging out with the Microsoft people and talking about all the new stuff coming down the pipe that they're working on. Mostly because it's stuff that I've complained about in blog posts. So it's it's like, oh, maybe you did read that. Cool, good for you. You weren't lying to me about it.
It's amazing where if you get to stand around in the Microsoft booth, I mean, you get access to all this NDA-ish type stuff where they'll talk through and answer questions. And does this really help you? Are you interested in this? Tell us about your use cases.
Yeah, there's all sorts of lions and tigers and bears out there. It was great.
Yeah.
I saw the booth. I saw it.
Just walking past it.
Yeah, just walking by. Yeah, I kind of peeked my head and oh look, there it is. And
yeah, he was on his way to go play competition Parcheesi or something.
vast, and I was not the cave this time.
Okay.
I would have to say that too. I used to think, I have enough access where I can talk to Microsoft whenever I want, or I can go, email them or whatever. That was my favorite part of the summit this year too. Was just the number of Microsoft big guns who were there, who were really fun to talk to. It's just amazing how you can Slava Oaks I've never met in person, and his laptop was there and the guy's just coding and I'm like, oh my god, that's the Clock Hands guy. I've read his blog post. I don't understand any of his blog posts, but I read them. My god.
Not because the English is bad, because it's too good.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough. It takes me like 4 reads to get through those. One of the attendees says, I love Brent's shirt, surprise, I'm drunk. Yes.
Except at this point, no one's surprised.
That's true. I gotta start shopping for next year.
Yeah, too bad you didn't wear that on Tuesday morning, Brent.
Man, jeez, yeah, or Monday evening. Holy cow! So we did. I should say, this is why the team really says that they like hanging out with their coworkers. This is the whole deal. Monday night we did an 8-course tasting menu with wine at Mistral Kitchen. I think we were the only people there. We closed out the restaurant, and then we ended up with, they were like, well, what else do we have? Let's give you guys a whiskey tasting menu. And Erik and I did some real damage to our livers at that point.
At Tuesday morning, the T-shirts that have said, surprise, we're still drunk.
Oh, God, that was rough.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So the next technical question is, we're looking for a geo-replication architecture, and we want it to include always-on availability groups across multiple sites, plus replication across multiple domains, plus transparent data encryption. I think that they're just pouring things into a stew at this point.
I think this is a headhunter trying to get Tara. We have all these things. Perhaps you've heard of them.
It sounds like a bingo card. We need little bingo cards for this. Does TDE cause any issues for such an architecture? Ooh. Tara's making the face.
I haven't used TDE with replication or availability groups, so I don't know what kind of challenges that might have. I know TDE adds performance overhead.
God, normally the thing I ask with TDE is just that, okay, so what's the goal here? If you're just trying to encrypt data at rest, there's a lot of communication that happens around from place to place where TDE is not involved. And when I see replication, that means we're going across, from one SQL server to another. I don't even know if the distribution database is actually encrypted with TDE. I don't know.
I don't know if it is, but I don't think if that whole time the data is going from New York to Dublin, it's not encrypted. That's wide open.
Yeah, so I don't think TDE would cause a problem. I don't think TDE is going to cause a problem with replication either, because it's only on disk that stuff is encrypted. So it shouldn't cause a problem. I would just say make sure you know the benefit that you're getting there, especially with TDE with AGs. If you ever rotate your keys with TDE, it's re-encrypting the entire database. That is a ton of log traffic that's going across from one replica to another. And while a database is re-encrypting, I haven't looked at this with 2016, but I know in all the prior versions, you could not take any backups while the database was re-encrypting. So that's kind of sketchy when you talk about large amounts of data there. Not that I don't like TDE. TDE is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's lots of things wrong with it, but you know where I'm going with that.
At least in 2016, you can get backup compression with TDE finally.
So how does that work?
You have to specify the max transfer size, and you just have to set it above the 65536. I think that's the right number, 65, whatever. You have to set it above that. It doesn't change. I blogged about it a while back if you want to if you're really that interested, you can do a search for I think it was TDE backup compression on the old Ozar site.
It's not enough to just enable backup compression. You also have to change this obscure setting, max transfer size. Even if you don't need to change max transfer size. There was a Microsoft Certified Master, Bob Pusateri, who did a session at PASS on backup compression. And I'd sat through it at our local user group. He's here in Chicago. And I'm like, backup compression, you just turn it on or off. That's all there is to it. If you want something more than that, you go get a third-party. Yeah. And it was great. He had all kinds of, there were trace flags that will output to the messages tab and show you the effect of different max transfer size and buffer count settings. It was really impressive. So if you went to the PASS Summit and you got the recordings, or if you're going to watch the recordings via streaming, I would actually recommend that session a lot for those of you who have databases of a terabyte or more. All right, so that's all the technical questions that we've got in there in the queue. We'll give you guys a few more minutes. If you want to ask any other technical questions, feel free to throw those over in the questions. We have one other one. Is there a benefit to using trace flag 174? This increases the proc cache. We are in an OLTP shop with tons of ad hoc queries. Oh, I have an opinion immediately. Tattoo Fragmentation says...
that is the last thing that I would do for that. I would, first, if you're not already doing it, switch on optimize for ad hoc workloads. Just get a plan stub so you're not blowing things out with single-use plans. And then, after that, I would also probably turn on force parameterization, so that if there's a chance that if a parameterized plan could get reused, then it'll do that. Especially if they're all ad hoc stuff and they're just getting passed into strings. It's not parameterized code. SQL's not going to parameterize it because it just sees, oh, look, new string. I want to do something new for this. And you just have a billion of the same plan over and over again.
Especially if you have a lot of ad hoc queries, adding more memory to the plan cache is the exact opposite of what I would want to do. I don't want to give ad hoc plans more RAM in the cache. Especially if you're an OLTP shop with lots of ad hoc queries, those ad hoc queries are probably relatively easy to compile, especially if they're like reporting type queries. I'd rather have that memory available to cache data. That's much more where I'd want to go. We don't get a whole lot of buttons we get to tweak around the plan cache and its size.
I might even just free the proc cache every once in a while.
Dang! Look at you. And what would be what's your logic there?
Well, I just don't care about it. It's probably a bunch of single-use plans hanging around waiting to get aged out. If there's there's probably just nothing all that important in there. If I take a look at my plan cache, or if say I run blitz cache and I look at the execution count column and I just see a bunch of single uses or one or two uses, I'm just going to clear it out and let things kind of every once in a while naturally refill.
Got it.
I'd rather just give that space over to something that could actually benefit me, and caching single-use plans is not it.
Do not try this at home, ladies and gentlemen.
The last question we'll take in there is, are there any good podcasts relating to SQL Server? Well, of course, there's this one. Then other ones, so I'm going to get my iPhone out from right here just to make sure I don't miss any, because I subscribe to a bunch of them. My favorite one is probably SQL Server Radio. Comes out of Israel with Matan Youngman and Guy Glancer. They're very funny. They take on all kinds of weird little topics. Somewhere around about, I think, an hour in length. And cover a lot of interesting different technical things. It's almost always Guy and Matan. That's SQL Server Radio. There's SQL Down Under with Greg Lowe out of Australia. The problem is he doesn't update it very often. I mean, he goes months, sometimes even a year or more without updating it. The past episodes are really good if the technology applies to you. He has access to Microsoft people, so he gets access or gets podcast interviews with Microsoft program managers, for example. There's also SQL Data Partners with Carlos Chacon and Steve Stedman, where they take a different approach than the other podcasts. They take a presenter on and basically talk the presenter through a training presentation. They talk to the presenter about what his material is and basically turn a presentation into an interview, so you learn technical things along the way. As Steve Stedman is also the guy behind the Database Corruption Challenge. If you are a production DBA who likes playing around with recovering from corruption, search for Database Corruption Challenge. Kendra Little has Dear SQL DBA. Dear SQL DBA is also available on YouTube and as a podcast form, where Kendra takes a question to the audience and goes, or from the audience, and goes really deep, like half an hour or more on the same subject. So she goes really far in depth, as opposed to us, we just kind of ramble a lot.
And her hair's purple too, so that's a bonus.
Also, it was great meeting Kendra for the first time at PASS.
Oh, that's funny. But, hi, how are you?
Good.
Did I miss any SQL Server podcasts? I think that's it.
Nope.
No?
Last one was we would be remiss if we didn't say Richie's Away from the Keyboard podcast. Richie, talk to the good folks on the audience about what your podcast is about.
Yeah, we talk to technologists, but don't talk about technology, which is we're trying to get inside the head of the individual and talk to them about, kind of their likes and dislikes and their hopes and their dreams and, what do they think about the future, and it's a good time. So what we want to do is we want to just see what they do behind when they're away from the keyboard. So we got a new episode coming out today after I clock out of work. So
if you're listening to Away from the Keyboard for the first time, the current episodes that's on there, Jesse Liberty, get part 1 as well as part 2. It was a really good interview, really compelling guy. All right, well, thanks everybody for hanging out with us this week. We will see you next week at office hours. Adios, everybody.
Goodbye.